Great day.
Hello, hello, everyone. It is so fun to see you all. Some of you have cameras on. I apologize if I look this way. It's because that's where my computer monitor is. And it's just so fun to read where everybody's from. Somebody just kind of down the road from me, Mari Jensen in Lehigh. Hello, Mari. We're like almost neighbors. We've got people from the UK, from Alabama, from Brazil, all over. So this is one of my favorite things about these classes, especially on Zoom. You know, people have gotten real zoomed out during the COVID season, but I think it's fun to remember that there's no other way that we could all join together from literally all around the world. So that's very cool. And we are so, so thankful for all of you joining us today. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into class because we've only got an hour. And if I know anything for sure, it's that hour is going to fly by. So just a couple little housekeeping items. Make sure that you post your project on social media so that we can see what you have done. We love to see everybody's unique spin on things. So if you post to Facebook or if you post to Instagram, be sure to use the hashtag #MakeItWithMichaels and also hashtag Stitch People and also hashtag DMC, the ultimate crafting trifecta. And that is how we will be able to find your post on social media, by following those hashtags. And then we can give you thumbs up and totally celebrate your success. We love to see what you come up with. Also, go to stitchpeople.com/Michaels if you need a pattern or supply list. If you didn't get it ahead of time, that is totally okay. You're still going to learn a lot from watching this class. So stitchpeople.com/Michaels will hook you up with everything that you need, and then post to social media using the hashtags #MakeItWithMichaels, Stitch People, and DMC, so that we can see what you have completed or what your in progress photos are. So let me go ahead and switch my view to our fancy overhead stitching. We have upgraded our setup since our last class. For those of you who weren't able to make it, we did a class back in, I think it was August. We stitched a Sherlock Holmes pattern together. It was so much fun. We learned how to cross stitch. We learned basic embroidery techniques. You can watch all of those classes available on Michael's YouTube channel if you just search for Stitch People. But today, and for the next 3 weeks hereafter, we are doing some projects with a fun holiday twist. And hopefully, as you could tell from the title of the class, this isn't just cross stitching, it is crafting with your cross stitch, or cross stitch crafting. The whole idea is, if you're anything like me, if you're an embroiderer, if you're a cross stitcher, you really enjoy cross stitching. And then slowly but surely, as you finish all your cross stitch projects, you have a plethora of cross stitch projects. And what are we supposed to do with them? Our walls are only so big. Our friends and family can only hang so many on their walls too. So what can we do to continue this hobby that we love, but maybe do some more unique things with it, so that we can put our finished pieces of art to good use and gift them and do fun things and expand our crafting horizons. So that's kind of the theme of these 4 classes, is what to do with your cross stitch projects once they're finished. So today, a very, very simple, very easy thing you can do with your cross stitch projects, especially around the holidays, is turn them into ornaments. These are ornaments that you could hang on your tree. These are ornaments that you could, especially if you're using bigger hoops, if you have bigger projects, they can just be wall hangings. You can put them directly on your wall with a nail and hang this on the nail with your embroidery hoop, or you could put a ribbon through the top and hang it, beautifully on your wall with a nice ribbon, what have you. So whether you're hanging on a wall or hanging an ornament on the tree, we're going to talk about how to use the embroidery hoop as its own frame for this purpose. So today's project is trimming the tree, Stitch People. This is the pattern that you will have used. So the first thing you want to consider when you are choosing to turn your cross stitch project into an ornament, I'm just going to refer to it as an ornament for simplicity, but wall hanging, whatever you're using it for, you want to consider the size of your work and the size of the hoop that you're using to create your ornament. There's a little bit of math involved. So I just want to put this little nugget in your ear as you are planning your own projects. So hopefully, we've planned it out such that doing this snowflake pattern will fit beautifully into a 4-inch hoop. It'll look gorgeous hung on your tree. But if you want to do your own pattern, make your own pattern, like with Stitch People portraits or any other cross stitch pattern you have, it's not so hard to plan it into an ornament. So a little bit of math, like I said, I've outlined it ahead of time so we can just sort of do an overview and then jump right in. So as you're thinking about creating your ornament, you want to think about the size of your hoop and the size of your Aida fabric here. Aida fabric is determined by a number. You typically will see size 18 Aida fabric, size 14 Aida fabric, and size 11. Those are some of our most common sizes, with I would say size 14 being the most common. What this number means, it's the number of squares or stitches per inch. So a size 18 Aida fabric means there's going to be 18 squares of the fabric like this, which essentially translate to 18 cross stitches per inch. Size 14 is going to be a slightly bigger stitch fabric because you can have, instead of 18 little stitches in an inch, you have 14 in an inch. And then size 11 is even a little bigger for stitching because you only have 11 stitches per inch. So one thing you can do to use up more space in your hoop is use a larger size fabric. So if you have a tiny little motif, but you want to put it, say, in a 3 or 4 inch hoop, if you do it on a size 11 Aida fabric, it's going to naturally just sort of zoom in a little bit, make the size a little bigger because the squares themselves, the stitches themselves, are going to be a little bit bigger. One thing to adjust is the number of threads you're using at that time. So as most of you know, your typical embroidery floss is DMC. That's my preferred. We love DMC's floss. It's gorgeous. It's called 6-strand embroidery floss because there are 6 threads that create the overall weave or strand of the floss. So most times when you're stitching, and as I usually recommend, is you split the strands to accommodate the size of Aida fabric you're using. So size 18 Aida fabric, I'd use 2 to 3 threads. Size 14, I prefer 3, but some people like to use 4 just to have a thicker look. And size 11, you're going to want to use 4 to 5 strands of floss. So that's just something to consider as you're thinking about the size of your project in tandem with the size of the fabric that you're using to fill the hoop you have. So going into some of my predetermined math that I've done for you, this particular pattern that we're using today, I just made some marks around the edges, counted my squares. It's 25 squares wide by 25 squares high. Now, in a 4-inch hoop, which you can find, on Michaels.com, usually Michaels stores as well, whether you're using size 18, 14, or 11 Aida fabric is going to change how big this 25 by 25 motif lays inside your hoop. So a size 11 Aida fabric gives us about 44 stitches left to right. And so our snowflake is going to take up about half of the space inside that hoop. It's going to be nice and big, nice and full in there, versus a 4-inch hoop for a size 18 Aida fabric is 72 squares wide. So that's going to give us a much smaller motif right in the center of this hoop. So that's why for this particular pattern, we have recommended size 11 Aida fabric, just because it fills up that space a little more and gives you a nice large cross-stitch motif that'll lay beautifully in the center of your hoop. So I know this is kind of technical, but I just kind of wanted to plant some of these seeds in your brain should you choose to use your own pattern that you've designed yourself, maybe Stitch People, whatever, or maybe you found a beautiful cross-stitch motif online or in Michael's stores that you really enjoy. DMC has a lot of great cross-stitch patterns, some free, some kits. So whatever you're using, if you want to make it into an ornament, just make sure that you're taking into consideration the size of the hoop, as well as the size of the fabric that you're using and how that's going to look in relation to your hoop. So let's jump into our little technique piece today before we get into framing. I didn't want it to just be crafting. I wanted to give you a little bit of cross stitching as well with each lesson that we do with this series. So I have a DMC Light Effects floss here. Most common DMC flosses used for embroidery and cross stitch is their beautiful 6-strand embroidery floss. There are hundreds and hundreds of colors. I'm obsessed. They're beautiful, they're shiny, they're glorious. They also have a number of other types of floss. They've got variegated flosses that are kind of like ombre colors or mixed colors. They've got beautiful etoile, which is kind of a crimpy floss with some glitter in it. That would also be great for the snowflake. But what I wanted to talk about today was using DMC Light Effects floss. It's sort of a metallic floss. It's very shiny, as you can see in the camera. We recommended the white light effects floss in our pattern, but that I had a hard time having it show up well on camera. So I'm just going to use this nice sort of bluish gray for today, just for the sake of demonstrating to you, so it shows up a little bit more clearly on my screen here against this white background. Lots of variables here. So regardless of what color you've chosen, I'm just going to walk you through some tips and tricks for using DMC Light Effects Floss. Some people find it very frustrating, and that's why I wanted to highlight it today, is to maybe demystify it for you. So like our 6-strand floss, our DMC Light Effects Floss is made up of multiple strands, and it looks like more than 6, but it is in fact 6 as well. But each of the 6 strands is sort of made up of 2 of its own strand, just the way it's weaved together. I know that can be a little bit confusing, but we've just got a lot of threads coming out here, just the way it's weaved together. And because it's sort of stiff, it's sort of metallic, these threads have a hard time staying together. And that, my friends, the stiffness is what makes it a little bit tricky to work with. So what I'm going to do is cut a length of this to work with. I like to use an arm's length. I hold the tip of the floss in my fingers, and I just kind of pull up to my elbow, the bend in my elbow or my bicep. And I find that that is a really nice length of floss to work with. You don't want to go too long, because that will inevitably just sort of get twisted in itself, wind up in a lot of knots. You don't want to go too short, because then you only get a few stitches in, and then you have to start over again and get a new length of floss. So I like a nice medium length floss here. I'm going to work from the freshly cut end. This is my tip number 1 for working with DMC Light Effects Floss, is when possible, if you run into issues, just cut it, maybe start fresh, and work as often as you can from the freshly cut end. Because as you'll see, this is the end I was sort of playing with when we were introducing the floss, and my freshly cut end looks like this. It's much less frayed. It's much easier to see what the heck is going on. So if you work from the freshly cut end, you're going to be able to make a lot more sense of all these stiff, kind of frayed, twisty edges going on. So from the freshly cut edge, we can now separate our twisted floss a little more clearly, and we can see these 6 strands a little bit better. Now I'm working with size 11 fabric. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be using 4 to 5 strands. Preferably, my preference is 4, but if you like a little thicker look, feel free. Heck, you could even use 6 if you want. That's totally up to personal preference. I just don't like my work to look too chunky. So I'm going to separate these threads real gently by holding 2 groups, one of 2 threads and one of 4 threads, because I want to work with 4 threads just for my size 11 fabric. And this is a little bit trickier to pull apart than the typical 6-strand floss. So I just take it real slow and real gently. That's kind of my trick number 2, is to just be really gentle and really patient, and your light effects floss will respond in kind. It's like a scared little puppy. You just got to pet it, make it feel safe, tell it lovely things, and it'll work with you really well. So once again, it's pretty obvious to see which was the original end I was working with and which is my more freshly cut edge here. One is more frayed and one is less frayed. So for my own sanity, I'm going to work with the more freshly cut end here. And I'm going to let the weave of it, it's kind of twisted together. And I sort of want to redo that for its own sake, so that these threads stay together. You'll find there's a natural twist that happens working with it that it wants to maintain. So you can just sort of lean into that, just sort of give it a little twist as you go and let it keep that machine-made twist. Well, I'm assuming it's machine-made. Now comes probably the next most tricky thing. Well, arguably the most tricky thing of working with this particular type of floss, the metallic light effects, is threading the needle. Because it frays so easily, like you could see at this end, this is why we like to work with the really fresh tip. And because it's metallic, instead of those beautiful, soft, malleable cotton fibers, I'm a licker. I like to just lick the edge of my floss. A lot of traditional embroiderers and cross stitchers will probably scream at me. I know, I'm so sorry, Grandma, somewhere she's yelling at me. There's waxes you can use for that same purpose, to just, you dip your fingers in a little bit of like beeswax or something, there's special waxes to make a nice tip to the floss to thread it. I usually just wet it with my tongue, but that doesn't work as well because this isn't nice, malleable, absorbent cotton fibers. So a little bit can help. The wax especially will help, but if you're a licker like me, it's not going to help too much. So instead, what I like to do is use my fingernail and get it real close to the edge of the end that I'm going to thread. And you'll see it sort of lines up all of the light effects fibers or ends, threads, all together in a nice little line, like little soldiers all in line. And you can sort of feed that vertical line that you've squished with your fingernail right through the vertical eye of your needle, and ta-da, you've got it. So you just take a deep breath, squish those fibers with your fingernail, get them right in line, and feed the full line all at once through your needle. Or use a needle threader. That would work too. I'm sure a lot of you are like, why isn't she just doing that? Because I don't have one nearby. So there we go. We have our needle threaded. What I do like about the light effects is I like to use DMC size 5 embroidery needles. It's just a personal preference that I like to use. And the size of the eye of this needle, it just, there's a little bit of resistance in here. So it doesn't pull through too easily. It doesn't slide around, which I like. So I give myself a nice long tail here. I don't start cross stitching with knots. I only ever cast on, which I'll show you now. So despite the fact that this motif is completely finished, I'm just going to go through and add a couple little stitches into the center so that you can see me work with this and get a sense for working with it. I'm not going to squish it in a hoop because I don't want to super crease my fabric. I've already ironed it so that we can get onto the framing part and have it look really nice. So I'm just going to hold it. I do recommend using a frame when you're working or using a hoop of some kind. But for now, I'm just going to jump in and do some stitches with you so that we can work with this together. So I bring my needle from the back to the front. So for those of you who are new to stitching, this is how I prefer to start cross stitching. This is called casting on. So you don't create knots because you'd have to make massive knots so that they don't pull through the holes of the Aida fabric. And then if you were to ever frame it or anything like that, it's going to be real chunky. So I like to just pull my floss through, leave a tail at the back, and hold it with my finger while I continue to stitch. And let me just make sure. Oh, I started at the wrong square because one of my #1 cross stitching tips is you always want all the under diagonals to be the same direction as all your over diagonals. So I started in the wrong, because I already have this fully cross stitched. I need to start in the correct square here so that all my unders are the same direction. Oh, please do. Spencer, my hubby, is here, everyone, and he's helping me on the technical side. If you have any questions as I'm doing this, just wanting to get a clean start here. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Spencer is here monitoring those questions. So if anything comes up, he will tell me and then I will answer it for you all. So I brought my floss up. I have a tail on the back that I'm holding with my finger and I'm creating my first diagonal for my cross stitch. Whoop, thank you. And I can pull that tight because I'm holding it with my finger on the back. Nothing is going to pull through. And then I bring my needle up to complete this cross stitch. And as I do, a loop will form on the back that I can use to catch the tail here of my floss. And I've left everything real big and nice and long so that it's easy to see. And that catches the tail and holds it securely in place so I can clip that short later. I don't have to worry about it. And on the front side, I can finish my cross stitch. Now, you'll notice, once again, that working with this light effects floss is a little different. You can see how it twists and turns and pulls over itself. So as you're stitching, this is another tip for working with this specific floss in particular, is as you're stitching with it, you just want to go, again, be patient and slow and gentle with it so that all of the threads or fibers of this particular type of floss lay side by side, really nice and flat on your cross stitch piece instead of bunching up or twisting up, which they're inclined to do because of how stiff they are. So if you're just nice and gentle with it, oops, once again, I did my wrong diagonal. I'm not paying attention, so I'm just backtracking here that I can match the diagonals of the rest of my cross stitches so everything looks nice and consistent. There we go.
When you're done there, people have a hard time distinguishing the colors on the map. Show exactly where.
Oh, sure. Okay, so for light effects, I'm just winging it because this pattern is fully complete already. We did that so that we could photograph it nicely for you and so that we could show you what the finished pattern would look like when we frame it. So light effects, what I would do, what's suggested in the pattern here is to use light effects E168, which is the white light effects. And I would substitute that for the white here in the pattern. Because that was going to be difficult to show because white, as you can see, white alone is just having a hard time showing up on the white fabric here. I'm just doing some example stitches with this darker light effects just for the sake of it. I'm just filling in the center. I'm just going to do 4 stitches with light effects just to show you some of these tips and tricks before we get into framing. My needle size, this is a size 5 DMC embroidery needle. So again, just working slow and steady, real gentle as you make these cross stitches with light effects. And I'm just pulling slowly so that all of these threads lay flat, side by side by side. And as you can see, it's worth doing, especially for holiday projects. This is why we wanted to start out the gate with the light effects techniques and tips for you on our first class, because it's October and we're getting to the holiday season and you've maybe not started your holiday projects yet, even just kind of winter themed projects. And DMC has such a great variety of light effects flosses. White, that they also have blues that would work really well in this pattern in particular, but any holiday pattern you do, they've got gold, reds, blues, silvers, black, white, all sorts. And you can see clearly here how well it does catch the light. It does look shiny and sparkly. So whether you're using it for details in a snowflake or individual white light effects, cross stitches as snowflakes in their own right, just, you know, single little sparkly stitches. Maybe you've got a big background. They could be stars, gold or silver in a dark sky. It could be beautiful stars. If you're doing a big, you know, star for Hanukkah or a big star for Christmas, either way, the light effects it just looks so elegant and it creates such a nice effect that's really, really eye-catching and light-catching. But a lot of people shy away from it because they find it a little bit difficult to work with. So I'm going to wrap this up. When you're done with a length of floss, what I like to do is go to the back side and just run my needle through some of the backside stitching. So it won't show up on the front, but it's going to secure it down. And then I just clip the ends and I'm going to clean this up because it's all secured. Get this out of the way, clean up all these little threads. This is very typical of light effects, is shedding. You know, once you clip the tails, kind of all these little threads will pop out. And the light effects, as you can see, it gets a little skiwampus over time. So again, my primary tips are, if you ever get to a point where it's just too frayed, start with a new length. Just start from scratch. It's pennies of floss. So just start from scratch, give yourself permission to just trash a length and start from scratch so you have a nice clean end to work with. Work from the clean end. Use your fingernail to flatten the threads when you thread your needle. Let the natural twist happen, lean into it, allow it, sort of feed it. That will help prevent fraying. And then as you're working with it on your pattern, just go really slow and steady so that all of the threads lay nice and flat and don't get twisted or chunky in your final work. And those are kind of my primary tips for working with DMC Light Effects floss.
People are asking about colored Aida fabric.
Colored Aida fabric is a really fun thing we just talked about with Chuck, who is the embroidery and cross stitch kind of buyer for Michaels. He told us that Michaels now carries a really fun array of colored Aida fabric. That is another way. I'm so glad somebody or some of you have brought it up. I'm going to change to my camera because I get excited talking about it. Michaels now carries a number of different colored Aida fabrics. And that is another way you can get totally personal with your projects. Whether, again, it's a motif that we've made like a snowflake or that somebody else designed that you want to turn into an ornament or your own design, There are so many fun colors of Aida fabric. Chuck specifically mentioned for our snowflake today, they have like a blue ombre fabric. So meaning a kind of a light to dark blue color. So it would look a little bit like the sky. And then you could really get creative and feel free. Obviously, we are not precious about any of the colors we recommend. We just do that to make it easy for you to jump right in. But if you did like a blue ombre Aida fabric background and change the colors of the snowflake to all be like whites and silvers, you could use the 6-strand embroidery floss and use whites and silvers, or do all like light effects, blues, whites, silvers, and then just have like a cool sparkly snowflake on top of a blue Aida fabric. That would look so gorgeous. So definitely, I hereby give you permission to use whatever the heck colors you want of floss, whatever the heck light effects you want to use to make things sparkly and festive, and whatever the heck Aida fabric colors you want to use to make things totally personal to you. Because if you don't like it, what's even the point? That's what I say. Permission granted. Here's my magic wand to give you permission to make all your own creative choices. I love that. Yeah, and it's all available at Michael's. So, and if you don't see it in your stores, definitely check out michaels.com. So now I want to talk about, you know, you've got your pattern, you've got your materials, you stitched your pattern, huzzah, you're all done. What now? I want to turn this into an ornament. I will tell you what now. So what I like to do after I've finished a piece is iron it, which I did beforehand. I've got a few little wrinkles in it now that I've been working on it with you, but I like to iron it. I set it to, you know, cotton or linen setting, and I usually iron just around my finished work because you want to avoid ironing the stitching itself. It'll kind of squish it, it'll flatten it. Sometimes if there's wrinkles right up close to my work, I'll hold the iron over, you know, but I'll leave a little room and I'll just kind of steam it and then tug like this just to get some of the wrinkles out. If you have had a project in a hoop like a bamboo or wood hoop, which has the sharpest kind of edges, that it'll leave the sharpest creases. If it's been in there for a while, it might be giving you some real hard times. I mentioned this specific idea with a grain of salt. It has always worked for me and Spencer, but I make no guarantees. Sometimes what we'll do is get out like a Pyrex pan, just a nice glass, clean pan. It's not metal. There's not going to be any rust or anything. And just soak your fabric. Just fill it with like an inch of water and lay the fabric in there and just let it soak. We have not had any issues with embroidery floss colors bleeding. That's never happened to us. I can't guarantee that it won't happen. I just will say it's never happened to us. And what that does is it sort of, once all the fibers in the fabric soak up that water, it really helps to relax stubborn creases. Sometimes it just won't come out with ironing. So we'll soak it, we'll pat it down with towels, paper towels, or really clean kitchen towels, or even a clean bath towel if you have it. And then we'll, you know, work with the fabric, stretch it out, get it nice and flat. Sometimes we'll dry it with a hair dryer and then give it a little iron if it still needs it. But never fear about creases, you can get them out.
Careful doing that with color.
Oh yes, if you're using color like a red or a blue, some sort of Aida fabric with a nice color on it, do be very careful. We've never used that because it's kind of a new trend and a new release for Michaels. We've only ever done it with like the white, the antique white, the linen colors, that kind of thing. So yeah, so like I said, huge grain of salt, no guarantees, but that is something that we have played with in the past.
Try it on small.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Spencer mentioned to try it on a little, you know, if you have extra fabric, soak that first, pat it on a white paper towel, maybe see if there's any bleeding before you do anything there. But as far as the DMC floss goes, we've not had trouble with that bleeding. We don't know about fabric. So now the question comes, what to do about framing? Well, I'm going to teach you how to finish your finished work as an ornament to hang on your wall or on your festive holiday tree. So we have a 4-inch hoop. DMC makes all sorts of sizes of hoops, and Michaels carries bunches of them. You can finish the back in a number of ways. Option number 1, there is fusible interfacing that you can get. Usually it's used for quilts or for clothing, like in sewing. You'll find it on bolts. And it's kind of got little glue dots on one side, and then the other side is just going to be a nice smooth fabric. I sometimes use that. I like to use gray. sometimes just to cover it up, because if you use white, you can still see the colors of your floss come through. But you can cut out a length of that and just sort of gently iron that on. It'll lightly stick it to the back, and then your back is kind of finished. That's an option number one. What we're going to do today is use crafting felt. This is kind of my new favorite way to finish off the back of a portrait or of a cross stitch work. I say portrait because of Stitch People. That's our brand. We do family portraits mostly. But I also have a piece of just kind of linen fabric here, and I'll walk you through the basics of what you would do to use a regular fabric, any kind of cotton, linen, whatever on the back. But what you first want to do is, this is assuming you're all confident with the size of hoop that you want to use for your ornament. We've got this 4-inch one. And what I'm going to do is just grab a pencil. You can use a water soluble pencil if you have one, but I'm just going to use a regular mechanical pencil and draw really lightly. And I'm going to, my head's in the way, so sorry. I just want to make sure I was centering it. So I'm going to lay the inner hoop just because it's a full circle and doesn't have a break in it. So I'm going to lay the inner hoop on the back of my fabric, and I'm going to center it. And today I am going to make the effort to center it exactly, just so that it works really perfectly. So here's the top of my motif. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 9 squares there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry about my head. 8, 9. Okay, perfect. So this is good top to bottom, and I'm just going to make little marks here. Now right to left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is right here. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so right to left, I'm not quite there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that is now centered. Okay, so now I'm just going to lightly with my pencil, now that I know it's centered, draw around the inside of this hoop. Again, this is on the back, and I'm just going really lightly to give myself an idea of what to do here. And you can see that light outline. Now is the moment of no return, and that's why I took the time to count left to right and up and down to make sure that it's going to be centered. I've got scissors. I could not find my good fabric scissors, so please, all of you fabric scissor aficionados, forgive my my basic Scotch scissors here. Now I'm going to cut into my fabric, and what I'm going to do, I'm not going to cut on this line. I repeat, do not cut on the line. We need slack, because if we were to put this hoop right in our fabric like this, you do need to have at least, see how I need to open that up. As you put the hoop where it needs to go, you need slack around the edges to catch in between the two hoops. So it's not just the size of the inner circle. That inner circle is just my guide, and I'm going to cut. You could measure it out if you're not confident. I'm going to cut about 1 inch around my guide. So I'm just going to say that before I start cutting. So do not cut on the line, cut about 1 inch around the outside of the line. So I'm going to come into here. And then, yep, I'm just going to keep an eye. And it doesn't have to be exact, because we've got if you're nervous, you could even do like a 2-inch exterior. And it's not going to be exact. Doesn't have to be, again, because we did make that initial line.
Does anyone else get really quiet when you're cutting with scissors like this? It feels like such surgery.
Okay. Okay, so I've done my cutting and there's no going back. It's all over for me. So now I'm going to frame this. And I'm going to lay it in the hoop. And I'm going to work from the back, because the back is where I trace that inner hoop. So I can see exactly where it needs to go. And I'm going to line up the top. Here we go. Now the snowflake is symmetrical. So I don't, just as long as one of the edges is at the very top, it'll be right. So I'm just laying my inner hoop on that guide that I traced, and just putting it in to the outer hoop, and we are pretty darn center. I'm just gonna tighten this up. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot of hypothetical options just because I like to give you ideas. Like I said, you have permission to do whatever you like and whatever makes you happy. So again, I hereby magic wand grant you permission to do whatever your creativity inspires you to do. For me, I'm just gonna do sort of a minimal clean backing, but sometimes for future projects, if it strikes your fancy, some people like the look of the outer edge kind of coming through like this. So you could purposefully leave a little bit more fabric and it almost looks like a little cute frayed edge. You could also use like a decorative ribbon that has maybe little pom-poms on it or some kind of Christmassy motif or snowflake motif. And you could, I happen to have some ribbon here. What you could do is if you're crafty, if you're a sewer, just sew on ribbon all around this outer edge. And then you'd have a really pretty kind of ribbony frame that would lay around the outside of, if we were really doing it, it would lay all the way around the outside of your hoop. So if it was something a little thicker, not sheer, where it would cover up the fabric, that would look really, really interesting and really, really fun. So you could stop here and just add a border and call it a day, is what I'm getting at. Whatever strikes your fancy. So I don't know which way this screw is going. There we go. I want to make sure this is really good and tight. And I'm going to just make sure I'm looking at the front. What I'm looking for is distortion, because I went around and pulled the fabric through just to make sure it was nice and taut in this frame. And now that I tighten the frame again, I just want to make sure that no particular edge is getting hyper pulled and creating a funky twist in my fabric. Like right there, I could see the line in the Aida fabric kind of had a wiggle in it. So that was getting pulled a little too much. So we are nice and centered in our frame. So now what? Well, first of all, one option is I pre-traced my crafting felt with the inner hoop, just so that I could show you this option. When you do that and you cut on the line, you have a circle that perfectly fits inside. What you could do once you have centered and tightened your hoop considerably, this is why you'd want to make sure it is really tight, never coming undone, not even during the apocalypse, not even during anything. It's going to stay tight forever and ever and ever. What you could do is trace your inner hoop on felt or regular fabric, cut it. You could just kind of lay it in there. You could tack it in using, white thread or floss so that it wouldn't really show on the front side. You could just tack it on, or you could use a dot or two of glue on, I would say, the wood, not on your fabric, on the wood, because it'll bump right up to the edge of the wood if you've traced it and cut it pretty accurately. Then what you could do is just cut this off. So this is option number one, and you just cut it off and it will just be perfectly in line right up against the inner and outer wooden hoop, and you've got a beautifully finished back. That is an option for your felt. What we are going to do, however, is, oh gosh, I should have prepped this in advance, but we can trace our hoop with our work in it. What we are going to do is sort of figure out a way, I'll show you how to tuck these edges in, and then I'm going to use my crafting felt to put it on the back of both of the hoops on the outside instead of on the inside. So what we do for this is sort of just a running stitch like you would use for sewing. So what I'm going to do is get my needle back out, and I'm going to use a white floss. It's just right over here. Pardon my reaching out of view. You can use, I tend to use floss just because it's what I have on hand. If you have sewing thread, use that. But for me, I just have my big box of floss nearby, and I'm just going to use that for convenience. I'm going to make a longer length than usual. Usually I just kind of go up to my bicep. I'm going to do that kind of and a half because I'll show you why. It's easier to work with a longer length on this particular method. Then what I like to do, you could, Oh, yeah, Spencer's just creeping around. You could use all 6 strands. I find that a little bit cumbersome, just thick to use. So I'm gonna split my 6-strand embroidery floss. I'm just using white because it matches my Aida fabric. So use whatever floss or thread matches your Aida fabric. Or not, because it's gonna get covered up. I just tend to match for convenience. Some people find the matching hard to see. It's just up to personal preference. You'll see what we're doing with it in a second. And then in the future, you'll be able to make a more informed decision as to what you'd like to do there. So I just licked the end really quick because I'm back to using my cotton floss. And I'm going to thread my needle here. And we're going to do, like I said, a running stitch to sort of scrunch in the ends all together. And this is why I mentioned before, you could do an even thicker edge if you wanted to, because it's all just going to get sucked into the middle here. So what I like to do is, and this is just how to do this finishing method according to Lizzie. If there's a more eloquent way that some of you know of that I do not know of, do that. But what I like to do is I'll just poke my needle here through the side. Now, because I'm a cross stitcher, I rarely start with a knot. But that said, this needs to be really, really, really secure. So what I like to do is I'll just actually do, this is so silly, but I'll do a little cross stitch because it is Aida fabric and I can, and I'll just to catch my own tail here. Now, if you were using a sewing needle and a sewing thread and you could double over your thread and tie a knot and you could really get into sewing mode for this, but I'm in cross stitch mode. So I just kind of do it my own cross stitchy way. So I'm just making a random cross stitch in the side. This is again, just to secure the floss. You can secure the floss however you want. And then I'm actually just going to run it over itself. There's no rhyme or reason. I'm just securing my floss. That's the name of the game. Whatever it takes to secure your floss so that no matter how hard you pull, it is not coming out. Okay. Now you just do a running stitch along this edge. And I like to stay sort of to the outer edge, not the inner edge, because it's going to be more effective. So you want to stay sort of towards, yes, where the edges are fraying a little bit. So be careful not to put your needle in an edge where your needle's going to get, or it's just going to fall through because there's fraying in the fabric. But you want to sort of stay to that outside edge. And we just do a running stitch up and down and up and down and up and down all along this edge. And this will take just a minute to do.
While you're talking about that, I had a question about as a newbie, do you stitch all of the single colors at once and then switch colors on your needle?
That is a really good question. And that is a little bit up to personal preference. So what Amanda asked was when you're stitching, and she specifically said when you're newbie, but this is something that everybody runs into. Do you stitch like a full color at once and then change colors and then do the second color, or do you go in sections? Honestly, that's really up to you. And I will pause to answer this question to show you on the pattern. So why that is tricky is, for example, this light blue DMC 162, there are 2 stitches here, a stitch, and then like a whole section here, a whole section here. So it's a little bit, this is definitely kind of a nightmare pattern for a newbie who has this question, because what the heck do you do? Honestly, my advice to you, especially for newbies, is do whatever makes sense to you. If you want to start here and do this, and then kind of hop over here and then hop over here, do whatever makes sense to you to get the pattern done. If you're a more advanced stitcher and you don't like to have a lot of zigzag crisscross on the back, like I have, because I tend to just, I work in colors or sections. I'll work on a color until the color runs out. I don't know. I'm not super systematized myself, but some people will start, do one, cut it off, start over here, do this little section, cut it off, move over here, do a section. It's up to you. I would say with a pattern like this, working in sections might be a little bit more effective, because as you do kind of these abstract, this section, it'll be easier to count, this white stitch in relation to these white stitches. If you have the blues anchoring them, if you have the dark blues, it's a little more contextual if you do it in sections that make sense to you. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of counting, and you're going to have to just be real precise with your counting, that you do these 2 stitches and you count 1, 2 up and 2 more over, and then do your next stitch, and then 1, 2 up and 2 more over and do your next stitch. That can get a little taxing and a little confusing. So for a pattern like this for a newbie, I'd suggest working in sections rather than by color. But if you feel confident enough counting accurately and working by color, feel free to jump in and do that. I hope that was a good answer. So I'm just going to continue this running stitch. And right now, I'm not really pulling too tight. And sometimes my needle is falling within the hole of the Aida fabric, and sometimes it's not. That's not really important at this stage. The important part is the running stitch. So just want to get that good. Now, as you continue this running stitch, if you start to pull it tight, you'll see, because we anchored it really, really well where we started it, if you pull it tight, you'll see it pulls the edge right in. I'll do that again. So for those of you who aren't watching, we have our frayed edge all around here in our frame. I've got the running stitch along a portion of it laying loose, but if I pull the running stitch tight, it pulls in the edge of our fabric. So that is our tricky trick. So that's why I suggested having a bit of a longer length of floss so that we could do this scrunchy running stitch all in one go. For the scrunchy stitch? Oh, okay. So Spencer brought up a good point that I will reiterate. So whether we're talking about this running stitch here around the edge of the hoop or your cross stitch work, there is no right or wrong answer as to where to start. So for the example of this running stitch, I just randomly started here on this edge because it was a little thicker. I had more room to do a little cross stitch, catch my tail, and secure my floss. And now I'm just going to go meet myself where I started. Same thing with your pattern. There is no real right or wrong way to start it. Some people find certain things easier. Working with this snowflake, I myself started in the middle just to work my way out, especially because it's a round piece, it's symmetrical, it's a little abstract, there's a lot of color changing. So if I give myself sort of an anchor that I can always come back to, like a center point, that just helps me and my brain. But if you'd rather work on the edges and work your way from the outside to the middle, thinking of giving yourself an outline working in, that could also make sense too, depending on kind of how your brain is wired. So don't stress. I know that's a lot easier said than done sometimes about various things in life. It's no big deal. Don't stress it. But it's true in this case. Just try and it's just cross stitch. We have a saying at Stitch People with our company that there's no such thing as a cross stitch emergency. It doesn't exist. Even if your child comes up to your years-long project and writes all over it with a Sharpie, that would be heartbreaking. But at the end of the day, it's just cross stitch. There's no such thing as a cross stitch emergency. We get the Sharpie out, we take it to a specialist, we start over, whatever. It's all right. Time gone, sure, but skill honed, lessons learned, and we can do it even better on the next go round. So especially when you're doing just a little motif, you're starting from scratch, don't stress, just start with the color that appeals to you most in the place that appeals to you most. Oh, I really like that dark blue. I'll use that first. Great. That is a perfectly fine justification for what to start with and where. Do what excites you. Life is too short. I love that. Well, yeah, it's very me. Okay, so I've done a running stitch around the entire edge of my fabric here. And if I pull tight, the whole thing just kind of yanks right in. And I'm going to keep it as tight as I can right now. Just pulled tight. And now I'm going to once again kind of improvise here to secure it, especially at this tight tension. So I'm just going to really quick, there we go. And while I've got a little window of tension here, I'm just going to run my needle through this fabric a bunch of times to secure it kind of knot. This will act as my knot as well, because I can loop the floss through itself, but it's also helping me to secure this tension and make sure that these edges stay nice and down. Now, one thing we could do that I can't do here because I don't have my ironing board here is if you really wanted to, if you really want to make sure this edge stays down, now that it's pulled in, you could take your iron and literally just squash it on top of this fabric here. And that would just steam it down, kind of crease that edge and make sure that that edge stays in. If you're not too concerned about the way your back looks, if you're not too concerned about any of this, ta-da, you could be done. You could tie a pretty little ribbon right onto here. If you're making neighbor gifts and you've got like 30 little ornaments to make, you know what? Nobody's gonna care. You tie a ribbon, bam, you're done. They hang that on the tree, they'll look at the front. That's all they're gonna see. So you could be done here. It just depends on how persnickety you are about wanting to finish. You could also do the method that I talked about before where I had traced the inner hoop on the felt, and you could just pop that right inside of this edge. If this edge doesn't bother you, which honestly, it doesn't super bother me, it's just the finishing edge, you could sort of just lay this felt in here. And this is why I like felt. I don't even really have to stitch that on because the felt is such, the texture of it, it's a little sticky, right? So against the wood edge, and especially being held in a little bit by this overlapping edge on the back, that felt will just sit right in there and it's not coming out. It's not coming out at all. Tap, tap, tap. Look, it's not coming out. It'll just kind of sit in the back and sort of, because of its texture, it will catch some of that embroidery floss and also be held in by this edge. So you could call that a day as well. What I'm going to do, however, is trace a new piece of felt and show you how I like to finish. I'm just going to grab a little marker because marker on felt makes it a little more visible. And now I'm going to trace the outer hoop on this piece of felt. And I'm just going to sort of make dots all the way around here, tracing this outer hoop. And if you look at it, you'll see that if we cut along these dots that I'm making, the felt would come all the way out to the edge of this outer hoop, if not even a little bit beyond, because I can see these dots outside this hoop. So if I cut on the dots, then ostensibly the fabric would be visible on the outside of the hoop as well, which I don't super want. So what I'm going to do when I cut this felt, you can kind of see my dots, my circle, is I'm going to cut on the inside edge of the dots, so that on my remnant that's left over, I'll still see the outline of the dots, and my hoop and my circle that I'll incorporate into my hoop will be just a little bit less than the outer edge, so it won't be visible from the front. That's just my little trick there. So I'm going to cut along the inner edge of these dots that I've made that were where I traced.
Once again, it goes real quiet.
I know, it's because I'm
We're
performing
cutting.
surgery. And if I do it wrong, like, guys, this is my only hunk of felt. I guess I could go use a funky color. I mean, I have other colors, but this is my only hunk of felt that kind of matches what I'm doing. It'd be embarrassing if I messed it up. So now you can see that this hoop that I just traced and cut is indeed larger than the inner hoop. The inner hoop circle would lay right inside, but this one can lay right on the outside, see? And I can't see it from the front because we cut on the inside there. So if I wanted to, there's a couple ways you could finish this off at this point, and this is a little bit up to personal preference. You could use a glue gun. You could use, I really like this crafting glue, E6000. You can get all sorts of really great adhesives at Michael's stores or online. You could just glue dot on, again, on the wood. I would not suggest the fabric all the way around, and you could lay that on. What you could also do is kind of tack stitch it on. I would use gray floss and just sort of dip into so that I catch my fabric here. I dip into that and just do a little stitch, just tiny little, almost invisible stitches, and that would hold it on nice and loose. Spencer just gave me my 4-minute warning. So I don't have the time to secure this on with you today, but I did want to walk you through those options. So again, you could leave it like this. You could even avoid this running stitch entirely and just cut it if you're confident that you will never ever take it out of this hoop and that it will never budge. You could do this running stitch method, the squinching method, and trace your inner hoop onto some sort of fabric or felt and just lay it on the inside like that. Or you could trace the outer hoop and completely cover the back so that it's nice and tidy. This option is really nice, especially if you have any sort of label, custom label. A lot of times people with handmade gifts will make like a little made for you, Johnny, with love from your grandma, 2021. You know, if you wanted any sort of embroidery, I know some sewing machines like make those little labels. You could tack that onto here with a little message. So it just gives you like a nice blank canvas on the back, especially if this is a gift. And then on the front here. So I do also want to give you a tip. With the ribbon that you use, you can loop it right in to the metal workings of the embroidery hoop. What I like to do is put both ends of your length together, bring it through your, I guess that's a screw is technically what it is. And it'll make a loop like this as you put both ends through, and then pull those ends through that loop and pull that tight. And that will help it lay or hang, hang correctly as an ornament. So now when you hang it on your tree, you know, you make a loop like this, we tie a knot. When you hang it on your tree, the loop itself it's going to help the hoop be forward facing, as opposed to if we just looped it like this, like you might be inclined to do, and you create a loop like that, the loop is sideways facing. And so if you hang it on the tree, it's going to hang sideways like this because of how the loop is centered. But if you double it through like we did and center your ribbon, this is just a little pro tip that I wanted to share with you after much trial and error, then your loop is going to be forward facing like this, and you'll be able to hang it straight on the tree and have it viewable. So hopefully this was a helpful exercise for you. Hopefully you understand a little bit better how to take your custom cross stitch designs or any other cross stitch designs that you might want to turn into an ornament and do that with the math of how big the hoop is in relation to how big your Aida fabric is in relation to how big your pattern is. That's definitely something to consider as you're turning a cross stitch project into an ornament. Then we have talked about using the light effects floss to zhuzh up your patterns and cross stitch portraits. If you're doing stitch people portraits, you've got a proper zhuzh technique with your light effects and some tips and tricks on how to use those a little bit better, and backing options, how to finish the backside, how to use felt. Fabric would be very similar as felt, just to kind of tack it along all the way around, folding the edge like thus. And then you've got yourself a beautiful holiday ornament. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for your good questions, especially you newbies. I'm so proud of you for speaking up. Never hesitate. And don't forget, please share photos of your snowflakes or any other ornaments you make based on what you learned today. Post to Facebook and Instagram using #MakeItWithMichaels, #DMC, #StitchPeople. And please make sure to sign up for our next class. It's #gifted. We're going to talk about how to make gift tags out of your cross stitch projects. And we're going to talk about the Boolean knot or Boolean stitch, just as our little technique nugget for next week's class. That'll be October 28th, same time. That's 12:00 p.m. Mountain, 1:00 p.m. Central. So go to stitchpeople.com/Michaels, sign up for that class if you haven't already. And please don't forget to take you're going to get a survey at the end of this class too. So that helps us figure out how to do even better for you next time. So
Lastly, we're going to make a revised pattern symbols.
oh, I see. Spencer said to let you know we'll make a revised pattern and send it to all of you who've signed up with symbols on it because the colors are a little hard to distinguish. Sorry about that. So be on the lookout for an updated attachment there. And thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry for speeding through the end here, going a minute over, but we so appreciate your time and have so enjoyed hanging out with you today. Cannot wait to see you next week to make custom cross stitch gift tags. stitchpeople.com/Michael, sign up for next week, week 2. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.